Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. Another round of job cuts at Microsoft this week. The company will lay off 9,000 workers, 830 here in Washington state. Seattle Times reporter Alex Halverson is here to explain what might be going on at Microsoft and what it means for the future. But first, let's get you caught up. Washington state has launched a new hotline for reporting hate crimes and bias incidents in King, Clark, and Spokane counties. State Attorney General Nick Brown says the non-emergency hotline will help people find local support services that are culturally sensitive and victim-centered. Since 2018, Washington is among the top 5 states in the country when it comes to the number of reported hate crimes, according to the FBI. The hotline is a pilot program for now and will be offered statewide beginning in 2027. This fall, voters will decide whether to renew a property tax levy to pay for emergency medical services in King County. The King County Council voted to put the 6-year levy on the November ballot this week. The levy would raise more than $1.4 billion to pay for EMS services that respond to 911 calls. If passed, it'll cost the median homeowner a little more than $200 a year. And if you're thinking about taking a dip in the lake as we approach the July 4th holiday, plan to check your beach first. Several beaches in the Seattle area remain closed to swimming due to high bacteria levels and also toxic algae. They include the West Beach of Green Lake, Pritchard Island, Houghton Beach in Kirkland, and Maidenbower Bay Beach in Bellevue. Check back for more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. Back in May, we talked to KUOW's Monica Nicholsberg about Microsoft's job cuts. At the time, she told us it was a sign that the stability that came with a job at Microsoft was changing. Now, less than 2 months later, the company is slashing even more jobs, 9,000. Seattle Times reporter Alex Halverson is here to talk about the company's latest cost cutting. Hey, Alex, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
So Microsoft just had 2 rounds of layoffs earlier this year. Now another 9,000 jobs are being cut. What's going on here?
It's interesting. About 2 years ago, Microsoft had a similar sort of mass layoffs, right? They laid off 10,000 people in 2023. What's a little different this time, the economic conditions are really different, but it's also the kind of way they're doing the layoffs. They had 6,000 in May. Oh, that's one of the biggest they've had in years. Now they've had 9,000 today. That's one of the biggest. You put those together, that's 15,000. I mean, that's a pretty stunning number. And again, going back to 2023, you could kind of see what was going on in tech there. There was overhiring from the pandemic, and a lot of tech companies were sort of what they were saying, right-sizing. Now we're in a more favorable market for tech companies. They're reporting record profits, record revenue, and yet we still see them chasing this sort of cost-cutting philosophy. Now, they've got different reasons for that now, but it is interesting to see the similarities from a few years ago in much different conditions.
All right, well, how is this playing out locally?
So 830 are local. Microsoft filed a warn notice with the state. Basically, they have to tell the state how many local employees will be affected. They listed 830. I followed up with Microsoft and I asked, is this going to be, all that come from this round for Washington? And they said, yeah, that should be. So it's a smaller representation of Washington workers for the broader layoffs than we've seen before. Rough math, it's less than 10%, around 10%. In 2023 and even in May, the Washington representation for those layoffs was about a third of the total layoffs. Maybe to note, Washington-based employees for Microsoft account for about a quarter of the total company. So Washingtonians were relatively spared in this round.
It can't be easy for morale, though, Alex.
No. And that's something I've been talking about with Microsoft employees for a lot of the past few months, really, since around that May round of layoffs. It's been a bit weird for employees, right? There's this fear because the layoffs are categorized as, hey, we're just cutting redundant roles, we're cutting costs, this isn't performance-based. They're not saying it's random, but it kind of feels random if you're an employee. It's been creating this fear, am I next? What am I going to do that's going to protect my job? Is there anything I can do that can protect my job? They're not getting warnings from managers. There's not a lot of communication from leadership. They're seeing the reports that we're seeing, whether it's a leak, whether it's a, hey, layoffs are coming, layoffs are looming. They talk about it internally. They go to their manager and ask for clarification, and the manager, most of the time, can only say, I don't know what's going to happen to your job or our team. So it's a really big, am I next feeling at Microsoft right now.
That sounds brutal, but tech layoffs are not even that surprising these days, right? Layoffs happen all the time in the tech industry, yet this one feels big. 9,000 is a big number.
It is a big number. It's kind of stunning, right? And especially when it's 2 months after 6,000. That's not a lot of time in between. That's 15,000 from just Microsoft this year. It's, off the top of my head, around 3,000 for Microsoft employees in Washington this year. The company will say, hey, this is a 3% reduction of our workforce, this is a 4% reduction of our workforce each time. But when a company is that big, that's measured in the thousands. And so that's thousands more people that are being kind of tossed into this job market that's not really favorable to tech right now as it historically has been.
It's interesting because Microsoft is doing well.
Yes, very well. I don't have it right in front of me, but for the past few quarters, they're consistently reporting upwards of $20 to $24 billion in profit, not just revenue, profit. Revenue is running up to like 70 billion, 80 billion. And I, off the top of my head, I can't remember the last time Microsoft lost money in a quarter. So they do quite well every 3 months.
What does this say that this massive layoff is coming?
I think it shows where Microsoft really wants to allocate resources. A big buzzword with Microsoft and a lot of tech companies is capital expenditure. And that's basically, this is really reductive, but that's how much money they're investing for future projects, the future of the company each year, right? Microsoft has really upped its capital expenditures this past year, as a lot of tech companies have. The fiscal year of 2025, which ended on Monday for Microsoft, they said they were on pace to spend $80 billion in capital expenditures for that year. That's up from $55 billion the year before, way up from years prior. And each quarter, when their chief financial officer goes over capital expenditures, she's saying, this amount of money we spent this year for investments for AI infrastructure, data center to meet the demand. And so I think we can kind of take Microsoft at its word a little bit when it's saying we want to streamline the company to sort of meet this age, make more nimble, agile teams to meet the technology. And above all else, I think it is sort of cost cutting to really protect those margins.
During an earlier layoff, Microsoft said it was looking to flatten management layers. Can you explain that? Is that what we're seeing here?
I've gone back and forth on this. One thing we did when those layoffs happened in May is we pulled data from the state that showed what type of roles were being eliminated in that round. And Microsoft tags employees one of two ways, either as a manager or as an individual contributor. Manager is obvious. Individual contributor is someone who reports to a manager. And we found that 17% of the layoffs in May were designated as managers. We reported that as sort of a, hey, Microsoft, you said you wanted to flatten management layers, but not a lot of managers got laid off. But then I talked to people who are in the tech industry who work at Microsoft, and they're saying it's a little more nuanced than that. Really, what Microsoft is trying to do is streamline its sort of organizational chart. There's a big buzzword in tech going around called span of control. Basically, the idea that, a manager has a certain amount of direct reports. We're right now, because of rapid hiring over the past decade, really, a lot of promotions, people getting management experience. There were managers that maybe had one or two direct reports, and they were kind of effectively maybe individual contributors. They just had a management title. Microsoft's really pushing for, hey, each manager should have like 6 to 8, maybe 10 direct reports. Microsoft's not alone in that. Amazon has this type of thinking. I'm sure Meta and Google do as well. And, there's also people saying, hey, maybe some managers might be switched back to individual contributors. So at first, like I said, when I saw that data, I kind of looked at Microsoft and said, you didn't lay off a lot of managers, but I guess if they're going through a huge sort of structural change, those aren't things we're going to immediately see in that data.
What are you hearing about which divisions are expected to be hardest hit by these layoffs?
Bloomberg reported 2 weeks ago and then a week ago that sales and marketing was going to get hit pretty bad, and the gaming division, which holds Xbox and PC gaming, and Activision Blizzard, which is a video game developer that Microsoft purchased, a few years ago. And I haven't seen any sort of outside of anecdotal data that supports, how hard they were going to be hit. But the company is sure signaling that. Phil Spencer, the CEO of gaming for Microsoft, shared an internal memo with employees that Microsoft shared with us, really acknowledging that, the division was getting hit, acknowledging that while it's had a lot of success, it has to do things to align with sort of the company's vision. And that was the only internal memo I've seen from sort of a division leader. So to me, that sort of says, gaming was hit pretty hard. But again, I don't have any sort of data that shows which roles.
We haven't talked about AI yet. AI is very much part of this story, but not necessarily in the way listeners might be thinking. So let's talk about how the layoffs and AI might be related.
Yeah, there's the conventional wisdom, the easy narrative of automation, right? Hey, AI is this new technology. Supposedly it's supposed to automate things, make it really efficient. And people can make a pretty easy connection. Oh, they introduced AI, they're getting rid of workers, AI is replacing workers. And Microsoft hasn't made that connection, and not a lot of companies have either. Salesforce, has kind of been hinting at, hey, we need to do less hiring because of efficiencies. Amazon's CEO, Andy Jassy, told employees, hey, in a few years, our headcount might fall, because of efficiencies. But none of them has said, hey, we're replacing workers, and Microsoft really hasn't said that. And, I do believe them. I don't know if the technology is quite there to sort of meet that demand of replacing one worker with one chatbot. But there are things that we're seeing in the May layoffs. A lot of coders were laid off. And Microsoft is telling us how much coding can be automated, right? How people can kind of sort of babysit AI coding. But I think the deeper connection between AI and these layoffs goes back to that cost cutting, right? Microsoft has to sort of show investors, hey, we might not be getting a return on investment next year from this $80 billion we just spent, but it's going to come down the line. And in the meantime, we can sort of trim some of that stuff that's eating into our profit margin.
It makes me wonder if we should expect more layoffs moving forward.
That's something we've batted around in the newsroom. Like, what's going to come next? How does this summer turn out for the tech industry? And is this sort of the end of that boom that the tech happened? I have no idea, right? I haven't heard any rumblings at other companies, but they sort of all do follow each other.
The entire tech sector, Alex, has seen some major cuts this year, with one outplacement firm, Challenger, Gray and Christmas, saying these job losses are the biggest in the industry since 2020. From your reporting, does it seem like these tech jobs are gone forever?
I don't know. It's hard. I mean, if the shift to AI is as fundamental as the shift to, say, the internet, like companies like Microsoft is saying, there's a good chance that, some of these jobs that were so normal in 2019 aren't really jobs anymore. Now, the question is, are they going to have a one-to-one replacement with, an AI-focused job? I talked to an economist with the state a few weeks ago, kind of about what the labor market looks like, how restructured it's been. And he was drawing historical comparisons to the 90s, the advent of the internet, the dot-com bubble, and the job market then. Very different economic circumstances now. Tech's doing better than it was when everything crashed. But the job market's really hard as well. And coming out of that, there were new jobs to replace the old jobs, right? New internet jobs, and then going into the mobile and cloud computing age, new jobs to replace old jobs that were archaic. AI is this kind of funny thing because the promise of AI is efficiency, more automation. Is there going to be those jobs to sort of replace the ones and then get people back into these companies? I don't know. I'm sure they would hope so because the job market's getting really difficult for tech.
And I'm sure there's a lot of computer science majors at UW right now wishing they had a crystal ball.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, and it's, if you're a senior, right, at UW or anywhere getting your degree, how different the sort of tech world looks than when you came in as a freshman, which shows how rapidly both the technology is developing and how rapidly these companies are willing to sort of take on that innovation.
Either way, there's going to be a ton of competition for jobs in the tech world, it seems.
Absolutely. Yeah. This economist I talked to kind of said for so long, it was jobs chasing people in tech. And now he's really starting to see, for the first time since he can remember, a scenario where people are chasing jobs in tech.
Wow, really interesting. Seattle Times reporter Alex Halverson, really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Today's episode was produced by Shane Malin. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Vaughn Jones, Andy Hurst, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you soon.